Born in London in '86, a stachio gent named Richard Parliament. He loves to wrestle, but he loves one more thing: handhelds round the world. He fights in his comments and he argues with fans. It's a problem no one understands. If there's two things he loves, it's getting at handhelds round the world. Drinking fine wine, fighting fanboys, handhelds round the world.
Top Hat Gaming Man.
Hello ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another exciting episode of Handhelds Around the World. I am Big Daddy Top Hat, and it is summer of 2020, and generally everybody is having the greatest years of their lives. In today's episode, I find myself at Port in Crete, Greece, a scenic location I have returned to shoot videos at time and time again on here. Whilst every year has not always been quite as interesting as 2020, mankind has had its sparks of excitement over the years. In fact, 26 years ago in 1994, we got Killer Instinct, the innovative arcade game developed by Rare that was designed with the primary purpose of generating hype for Nintendo's Ultra 64 platform. The game was intended to give consumers a snapshot of what console gaming had to come, and with its eye-popping graphics, long brutal combos and loud sound effects, the game was successful in grabbing everyone's attention. The game's announcer would even inform players that this game would be arriving in homes in 1995, only for the Ultra 64. Surely the only system in development that would have been capable of housing such a beast in the living room. Sadly though, the game's promise was never to become a reality, as Nintendo's platform was severely pushed back, which was mainly due to Nintendo struggling to find third-party developers and publishers willing to make games for their cartridge-based hardware. In this time, Rare would still cash in on the now established Killer Instinct brand by achieving what looked to be impossible prior, porting this game that was intended for 64-bit hardware to the extremely limited Super Nintendo. The Super Nintendo version of the game was programmed insanely well, and consumers were more than happy to purchase the conversion, resulting in it becoming one of the best-selling games ever released on the humble 16-bit platform. Eventually, the Nintendo 64 would receive Killer Instinct Gold in 1996, an altered version of the arcade game Killer Instinct 2, made bespoke for the hardware, but sadly, even with this system's more powerful hardware, it too failed to fully replicate the quality of the 1994 arcade game. So, even after a long delay, it would seem that the Nintendo 64 was not truly capable of delivering an optimum Killer Instinct experience. Keeping this in mind, then why the bloody hell does this exist? An 8-bit conversion of the advanced for its time arcade game. Either way, the fact that this title exists is yet further proof that the line available in your homes in 1995 only for the Ultra 64 was certainly a complete and total lie. So, whilst at this port today, we are going to be looking at this port today. See what I did there? A Game Boy version of the game was created to emulate a title that was purposely made to showcase the potential power of the Ultra 64. It all seems paradoxical to me on so many levels, so let's take an in-depth look at how this game came about and if this outrageous title lived up to the Killer Instinct branding whatsoever. The Killer Instinct Game Boy was released in a period commonly known as the Play It Loud era. Play It Loud was a campaign that was being ran by Nintendo at the time to promote their new line of obnoxious looking, brightly coloured Game Boys. Whilst Atari, Sega and NEC had all offered full colour gameplay experiences on the go years prior, Nintendo were only now reaching the stage where gamers could introduce a bit of colour into their lives, but via the handheld's shells rather than the actual in-game action. Radical bloody stuff. In this era of loud garishness, in June of 1995, Nintendo and Rare would shock the world with the release of Donkey Kong Land on the Game Boy platform. This was only 1 year removed from the release of Donkey Kong Country on the Super Nintendo, a game that, like Killer Instinct, wowed players with its pre-rendered graphics that used 3D models created using Silicon Graphics computers. In a surprising turn of events, many of Donkey Kong Country's background elements, character models and sound effects were directly ported from the Super Nintendo game onto the 8-bit Game Boy title, resulting in impressive results with a game that retained the same style as the original. Like Killer Instinct, Donkey Kong Country was certainly a game which many people would attribute its success levels to its fantastic visuals, which is why it was so unexpected to see Silicon Graphics rendered games popping up on the Game Boy. Rare would even poke fun at this situation themselves with the game, even making it part of the title's story, which chronologically takes place straight after the Super Nintendo game. In Donkey Kong Land, Diddy and Donkey reflect on their previous adventure, but out of jealousy, Cranky Kong scolds the both of them regarding their success, implying that Donkey Kong Country only sold so well because of the elaborate graphics and sound the Super Nintendo could deliver. Irritated by this, the young Kongs explain they earned their success because of the fun gameplay and not just the graphics and sound. This results in Cranky teasing his juniors by stating they could not replicate the success of their past game on a monochrome 8-bit handheld, causing Donkey Kong and Diddy to accept his gaming challenge, which sees him calling King K. Rool and his Kremlins to steal Donkey Kong's bananas and scatter them across Donkey Kong Island once again. The effort put forward to create this game was universally praised, as despite the Game Boy's limitations in gameplay mechanics that needed to be changed to better suit the hardware, the title was surprisingly good and faithful in experience to the original. But what about Killer Instinct on the system? Could it even give players a taste of the Ultra 64 arcade game? With regards to the making of this game, the same techniques seem to have been applied to create the title that were implemented into the creation of Donkey Kong Land. Like Land, Killer Instinct for the Game Boy features background elements, character models and music that were featured in the Super Nintendo game being ported over to the more humble platform. According to the game's manual, yes, I owned a bloody manual for this one, it hypes the game up by stating the arcade hit goes portable. 9 of the original arcade characters have been faithfully recreated to deliver arcade experience on the Game Boy. It is of note that if you played the arcade version of the original game, there are 11 characters included in total, but this version omits both Cinder and Riptor from the playable lineup, which was obviously a move that was implemented due to the Game Boy's limitations. What I find more interesting about this though, is that this Game Boy game was released in November of 1995. A calendar year before the release of Killer Instinct 2 in the arcades, a game that would also omit these 2 characters, but on that occasion in favour of new ones. Thus meaning this Game Boy game illustrated which characters the Rare team favoured prior to the release of the next entry in the series. At least in the 8-bit game though, we can still play as Chief Thunder. Despite a smaller lineup, 9 is still a decent selection of fighters for an 8-bit Game Boy game, and the roster is bigger and more impressive than what can be found in the Game Boy Mortal Kombat and Street Fighter 2 games previously, meaning the game was an ambitious effort on many levels away from the graphical style itself, with this great fighter selection being a prime example. Like with all games ported over to the Game Boy, aside from the system's graphical prowess, another factor that programmers must contend with is making a game playable with the Game Boy's simple 2-button layout in mind, which is obviously a major departure from the Super Nintendo's 6 buttons if we include the L and R button shoulder triggers. Despite these limitations, Killer Instinct for Game Boy still manages to let players perform fast-paced multiple attack combos that helped make this franchise so famous in the first place. To compensate for the lack of buttons available on the device, the same button is often implemented to perform various maneuvers, such as a tap of the A button allows players to perform a weak kick, whereas holding it allows for a fierce kick, and the B button functions in the same manner to allow for different strengths of punches. Tapping up allows players to jump, and combining inputs of the directional pad with the A and B button allows players to perform many of the franchise's satisfying looking combos. In fact, all of the game's mechanics from previous versions have been carried over in one way or another, including special moves, charge moves, roll moves, and of course the famous combo breakers. Moves that can be executed to end extended hit combos. In fact, even ultra combos are back, if players fancy making their opponents truly humble. Obviously, the Game Boy's limited control scheme doesn't allow for an experience quite like the other versions, but it's still a cracking effort with everything else considered. The ground rules of combat in the game are the same as with the other entries in the series, and victory is achieved when a fighter depletes both of their opponent's life bars. Like the first game, and most fighting games in general to be fair, in the game's main play mode, combatants must defeat every player found in the game, including the boss fight in the final throws. This means that Idle makes a return to action in the game, who can also be played as using cheat codes. The game also has a practice mode, but a more surprising feature in my opinion is the game's link mode, which allows 2 players of the game to fight against each other using 2 Game Boys, 2 cartridges and a Game Boy link cable. The game link function allows 2 players to go head to head. Something else worth noting about this title is that it is one of the Game Boy titles that featured enhancements if played using the Super Game Boy add-on on the Super Nintendo. Basically, when the game is played in this manner, the title features a more varied colour selection than just monochrome green, and the action is all framed by a custom Killer Instinct border too. Nice. So, I guess to summarise, if you are looking for an arcade-like Killer Instinct experience, you are definitely not going to find it with this simplistic Game Boy port. However, it is still great to see what the development team who made this game were capable of, considering the severe limitations that were obviously imposed when getting a game like this running on such hardware. At the end of the day, it is cool to see a high-end arcade game appearing on the Game Boy, and the fact that it is even playable and replicates many of the tropes of the series is an accomplishment in itself. It is also awesome to hear the game's fantastic soundtrack in 8-bit for a change. In some ways the game is worth checking out just to hear that, as it is very novel. Overall though, that is all I feel I have to say about this game really. It is what it is. But it is a fun curiosity that is part of a major franchise, even if it isn't anything else. Killer Instinct for the Game Boy bloody exists, it's playable, and that's all we could have hoped for really. I'd argue that this version is less of a disappointment than Killer Instinct Gold, as no one expected a perfect Killer Instinct game on the Game Boy, yet we expected to see so much more on the upcoming Ultra 64. Overall, I'm pleased that I own this oddity amongst my collection, as it is such an awesome little talking point, and if I'm ever in the mood, I always have the option to play it loud. If you enjoyed today's video covering Killer Instinct history, I've made standalone videos covering the release of Killer Instinct, Killer Instinct 2 and Killer Instinct Gold on here in the past. In fact, I release a different video celebrating the history of a different fighting game on this channel each and every week. So if you want to learn more or simply get a nice nostalgia fix, then consider subscribing to me, the Top Hat Gaming Man, here on YouTube. I have the time to work on these videos on a full-time basis, in part due to the loyal members of my fan base who back this channel over on Patreon. Patrons gain early access to content, get to read my blogs, access my Discord, and even earn credits in these videos. So, from here, huge thank yous and shout outs go out to Sebastian Velez, Carl Johnson, A Murder of Crows, Heyo Paulo Lopez, Joseph Razmek, Doug Perkins, Lou Johnson, BXL Gotham, Rowan Dinch, Evan Balder, Philip Mant, Camber Rambo 82, Azrael Rarakai, Keith Ferguson, Joaquin Varela, Prince Knight, Michael Cullix, Ago, Jordan Durant, TOG Driver, Angel Light 85, Alethea Swanson, Timothy W. Haskins II, Nick Daniels, Princess Zana, Carlos Domingos, Glenny Glenn, Daniel Daly, Computer Man, House of Ted, SpongeMatt B, Gary Pinkett, ECU Professor, Aaron McNamara, Instant Gratification Monkey, Man Shovel, James Bishop, JB, PostDXL, Michael Hall, Wesley Sanghi, Ron Studd, Isabel N, Langston Miller, Noob, Brian Barry, Stephen Lewis, Sarah Powell, Vlaming Renee, Sarai H. Al Sarai, Marvin Araliga, Chris Cool, Adrian Hannington, Bernard N.G., Richard Stu Stewart, James McDonald, Crazy Yarl, Dan Van Dammit, Adam Castin, Gregory Smoradiewicz, Lewis Viant, John Bates, David Bale, Chris Fisk, Paul Elliott, Mean Machine Dean, Mike Bruno, Rick67, Antonio Rodriguez, Hans Christian, Craig Jenkins, Tom Elliott, Retroverse.com, Casey Wright, Synth Spaces, Zai, Andrew Byzanski, and all of my other patrons. As Elvis Presley once said, thank you very much.